Welcome to a special year-end Washington in Focus, where we look back at some of this year of 2024's top stories and give you a little bit of insight into what happened behind the scenes and what to look for as we ring in 2025. Joining me is Washington State editor Brett Davis. Brett, happy holidays. How are you?
Thank you. Pretty good. I can't believe it's almost at the end of the year already. It just kind of flew by.
I keep hearing people say, this year just seemed to go so fast. And for me, it's like this year seemed to have started in 1997. With the election and so much drama and just so many things going on and controversies in Washington State. I mean, we could fill an hour episode with this, but we'll try and rip through some stuff lightning round style here. First,
you're suffering from an acute case of time dilation.
Oh, terrible. I feel like I'm going to ring in my 60th birthday next year. Starting off, our investigative reporter, TJ Martinell, has been covering this for more than 2024. This actually started back in 2020 with a high-profile murder of George Floyd in Minnesota. But it led to lawmakers in Washington State enacting a requirement that the state create a police use of force database.
Right.
And there were immediately concerns raised with the bidding process because, one, it wasn't done through the state's normal procurement office. It was done through the Attorney General's office, run by now soon-to-be Governor Bob Ferguson.
Right. So as you mentioned, TJ Martinell, our investigative reporter, he's been writing on this for a long time now. So basically, I'm going to thumbnail this. The AG's office has basically been accused of perhaps engaging in unethical and illegal violations related to selecting Washington State University to create this police use of force database. Basically, it looks like they were always going to get the contract no matter what. Right. Basically what it looks like.
And as the year went on, TJ had continued to find different questionable ethical behavior, and he used a valuable source of his named Bob Scales with police, who initially did bid on this and was passed up, and there became a bunch of issues with the state demanding to own the intellectual property from anybody there.
Right. And so, Bob has been feeding TJ a lot of information. What I thought was interesting about this coverage was I haven't really seen this story anywhere else, or I think I've seen maybe one story, but TJ's written, a host of stories on this. As far as I know, we're the major news outlet covering this. I haven't seen this really anywhere else other than maybe one, maybe two stories.
Well, it became so important because, it's a $15 million contract that still, you're going on 4 years later, is still just kind of sitting around. There's nothing's been built. And there's contractors that originally contracted with him. Intel, I believe, was one, dropped out because they didn't want anything to do with it. So moving forward, and this story has just been absolutely fascinating to watch TJ's coverage of it. And it led to a nomination for a major national award. Tell us about that, Brett.
Right. He got nominated for a finalist in the local journalism category for his coverage of the 2024 Dow Awards for excellence in investigative journalism. So he got to journey to the other Washington, D.C. He didn't win, unfortunately, but, I think it's just a big win that he got nominated for his outstanding reporting.
Absolutely. TJ did a great job. And you know what? Always the bridesmaid, and that's fine. We'll take it. And I can't wait to see what TJ comes up with in 2025 on coverage of this important
continuing
topic.
Story.
Absolutely. Moving on, we saw originally 6 citizen-led initiatives to roll back major laws and progressive goals, environmentally mainly, in the state of Washington, led by a group called Let's Go Washington, a voter advocacy group. And 2 of those lawmakers passed and said, you know what, we will bend to the will of the people, and we don't want to have to fight this battle at the polls. There were others that did go to the polls and that hit ballot boxes and faced a massive billionaire-led opposition against them. But one thing that we did find was a quiet effort to invalidate them through the courts at the 11th hour. Tell me about that, Brett.
Right. I actually found out over this when it was coming back from actually meeting with some team members. And I heard this on the radio and thought, well, this is right before I was going to go on vacation. So I thought, well, this is going to be delayed a little bit. So I drove all the way home, making phone calls, at stoplights and sending texts at stoplights to get the lowdown what was going on. So basically, Let's Go Washington, the group behind there ended up being 4 initiatives on the ballot. They say they were blindsided to find out that the state Supreme Court was about to decide whether to invalidate all the voter-backed initiatives on the November 5th ballot. They had no idea this was even happening, which is very unusual. And normally the other side will, let the other side know that, there's a decision coming. They didn't know. But, in Bob Ferguson's office, the current attorney general and ex-governor basically said, oh, we filed all the proper paperwork. They should have looked into this and known. That's their fault that they didn't know about this. But, that's not usually the way things go. Usually you let the other side know that there's a big
right.
decision coming.
Well, they weren't the defendants,
right?
But they were definitely an interested party. I would say
interested.
To say that is quite the understatement. When you have the work and millions of dollars in the effort, 420,000 signatures on each one. And it would have just vanished by a gavel. And it was one of the most audacious stories I think we put out in 2024. Right.
We weren't the first, but we were one of the first, which I was very proud of.
Yes, we were one of the first to come out with that. And we had some great follow-ups over the questions as to how on earth this could have happened. But thankfully
the Supreme Court didn't rule, to take.
No,
but still, the whole effort just it stank. Basically, it was very unusual to say the least.
Yet another understatement. But nice work on that, and I appreciate you taking time from right before your vacation hit to make sure our readers knew about this effort. And finally, one of the most fascinating stories out of Washington that is still going on right now, where initially before the election, the state said, well, hey, you know what? We're facing a little bit of a budget deficit. It's, $4 or $5 billion. And then as a couple days after polls closed, that number jumped up hard, up to 10 to 12.
And then somebody from the governor's office used the figure of $14 billion. And then the governor himself, during his recent, budget proposals, he used the figure $16 billion. So a lot of us are confused about how big the budget deficit really is. They're kind of falling back on the $10 to $12 billion, but these other numbers have been thrown out there. So people are a little skeptical.
Well, and to pull back the curtain a little bit on that, when we initially reported, we were going to report that a staffer, an analyst, had told a state board of education panel, hey, listen, it might not be 12, it might be 14. It might be a $14 billion deficit now. And we heard it. And Carlene Johnson, our Capitol correspondent, reached out to the governor's office and said, hey, your employee just said 14 billion. And it was a back and forth between the two. And they said, absolutely not. That is not true. That person misspoke. And we made the decision at the time to say, we're going to report on the meeting, but we're not going to potentially lampoon some staffer that may have just misspoken, said a 12 or a 14, may have taken different numbers together. And we did not highlight that at the time.
Right.
Trusting the governor at his word. A couple days later, we hear that number from a lawmaker.
Yeah, I think it was Senator Jamie Peterson. I think he used the $14 billion figure. So we all went, what?
Right. And then so we reported on that and then went back and said, okay, a couple days ago, this was said by the governor's office.
Right.
And brought our readers that at that point, knowing that they had that number in mind. And now the governor says 16 billion.
Yeah, he's added a couple of billion to it. What's a couple of $1 billion among friends?
But that leads to the question that we're going to be moving into 2025 with as the new governor comes in is who do we believe on how much money is the state overspending by? And what the most important thought is this just a plan to justify increasing the budget?
Right.
And I think that, Brett, is going to be, you're going to spend a lot of time on that in January.
I am. I mean, Inslee brought up during his budget rollouts, the idea of a wealth tax and expanding the B&O tax. So it seems like it's already rolling. And this is despite the fact that the state doesn't seem to be out of money. I mean, revenues for the 2025, 2027 are predicted to be more than $5 billion higher than the current biennium. So it's not like they don't have money.
Well,
They just spent a lot more money than was coming in, and now
it's been a captivating 2024, and I look forward, Brett, to what your team comes up with in 2025. Thanks for joining me, and to our listeners, have a great new year. This is Washington in Focus's Year in Review.